Let me tell you what money bought in this story, in order. It bought a 19-year-old girl's silence for about 4 hours, which is how long it took a security detail to get every phone in that house unlocked and every video of the hallway deleted. It bought a private ambulance instead of a county one, so there would be no dispatch recording. It bought a doctor at a clinic 40 minutes away who wrote "fall" on an intake form. It bought a caterer's contract for the next 18 months, on the condition that a woman named Vesta stopped answering her own phone. It bought a sheriff's detective an easy afternoon and a phrase, "no complaining witness," that closes a file without anybody having to lie in writing. 2 years earlier, it had bought another girl a settlement, an apartment in another state, and a paragraph she signed at 19 that she has been living inside ever since. Money bought all of that in one evening, and it was cheap, and it worked. And if you are the kind of person who thinks the world is fair, I want you to sit with how well it worked. I'm Nathan. Here is the only thing money could not buy that night. And the reason I wanted to tell you this one. There was a form. A plain government form with a number on it and a box for a date, and the man they were dealing with was legally required to fill it out. He did not need permission. He did not need a lawyer. He did not need one single person in that county to be brave. He needed 9 minutes and a working internet connection. Frank Brannon was in the truck outside a hospital in Kingsolver County when the phone rang with a number he did not know, and a man's voice said, pleasantly, "Mr. Brannon, my name is Vaughn. I believe our children had an unfortunate evening." Frank was 47 years old. He had spent 22 years in the United States Army, the last 14 of them as a counterintelligence special agent, and then a warrant officer, which means his entire professional life had been about a single skill, sitting in a room with somebody who is lying to you and not letting them see the moment you stop believing them. He had done it in Kandahar, and he had done it in a strip mall office in Georgia, and he had done it, twice, to men whose job was doing it to him. So he heard the whole architecture of that sentence. Our children. An unfortunate evening. Inside the building behind him, his daughter Thomasina was on a gurney with her jaw wired in 3 places, and a resident was explaining to her, in a slow voice, that she would not be eating solid food until October. "Go ahead," Frank said. "I want to say first that I am appalled," Vaughn said. "Genuinely appalled. My son has a problem, and I have not been the father I should have been about it. I have been on the phone about this for 2 hours, and I want to fix it tonight, not in 18 months of depositions that will chew your daughter up worse than anything that happened in my house. Where is he? He's with counsel. Mr. Brannon, listen to me. I'm going to be very direct with you, because I think you're a direct man. Money makes this disappear. It just does. That is not a threat. It's arithmetic. Name a number, or walk away and take your chances with a county that has a 2-year backlog and a prosecutor I have known since he was in law school." A pause. "I would take the number." Frank looked at the doors of the emergency department. A man in scrubs came out, lit a cigarette, looked at the sky. "Mr. Vaughn," he said, "you have no idea who you're talking to. You have 10 minutes to hand him over to the sheriff's office. 10. There was a silence on the line, and then Vaughn started laughing. Not cruelly, almost warmly, the way a man laughs at a dog that has learned to open a door. "Oh," he said. "God. All right. 10 minutes." And he hung up. 9 minutes later, Frank's phone rang again, and the voice on the other end was not Vaughn. It was a woman, and she was breathing wrong. "Mr. Brannon, my name is Kestrel Ridgely. I represent the Vaughn family, and I need to know exactly what you have just done." To explain what he had just done, you have to understand what Frank Brannon did for a living, and that is where this story really starts. When he came off active duty, Frank did the thing a lot of counterintelligence guys do, which is discover that the outside world has almost no idea what to do with him. He was not a bodyguard. He was not a private investigator. What he was, precisely, was a man who understood the rules that govern how secrets are kept inside private companies. And there is a whole industry built on those rules, quietly, in the office parks along the interstates of Northern Virginia. Any company that wants to work on classified programs has to hold something called a facility clearance. To keep it, the company appoints a facility security officer, stands up an insider threat program, and agrees to a rule book that most Americans have never heard of. And one of the least glamorous, most important lines in that rulebook says, when a cleared employee does something that bears on their reliability, judgment, or trustworthiness, an arrest, a violent incident, drug use, unreported foreign contacts, financial collapse, a coercion attempt, the company must report it. Promptly, in writing, to the government, not to the police, to the government's own security service. And the reporting is not discretionary, and it does not care who the employee's father is. Frank and his partner Gene Kepler, a retired Air Force special agent with a bad hip and an unbelievable memory, ran a two-man shop that companies hired to audit those programs. They came in for 6 or 8 weeks, read everything, interviewed everyone, and wrote a report telling a defense contractor exactly where its security posture was fictional. It was unglamorous work that paid well and made them extremely unpopular in a very specific way. It is worth telling you what Frank was actually like at that job, because it explains the rest. He had been a decent soldier and an unusual agent. The unusual part was that he did not enjoy the confrontation, which in that line of work is rarer than you would think. The men who love the interview room tend to want a confession. Frank wanted a record. A confession can be recanted, and half of them are wrong anyway. And the ones that are right came out of a room where somebody was frightened, which a defense attorney will make hay of for a year. A record is boring and it does not change. In 2011, he had worked a case that shaped everything after it. A contractor employee at a facility in the desert had been passing maintenance schedules to a man he believed was a journalist. It was not espionage out of a movie. It was a lonely 50-year-old who liked being asked questions by somebody who seemed impressed by him. Everybody senior wanted a fast, loud resolution. Frank spent 5 weeks building a timeline of badge swipes, printer logs, and gate camera stills, and when he finally sat down across from the man, he did not accuse him of anything. He put 22 pages on the table, in order, and said, "I'd like you to correct anything in here that's wrong." The man read for 11 minutes and then said, "It's all right. It's all correct." And that was the case. What Frank took from it was not a technique, it was a belief. And it is the spine of this whole story, that the person who has written it down, in order, with dates, has already won any argument that has not started yet. Everything else, outrage, threats, leverage, favors, a good lawyer, is what people reach for when they did not do that. He tried to teach it to Tommy the way fathers try to teach anything, which is badly and constantly. When she got rear-ended at 17, he made her photograph the other car's plate, the intersection, and the time on her own phone before she said one word to the driver, and she rolled her eyes so hard he could hear it. When she started the catering job, he told her to keep a note of her hours in her own phone, because a 19-year-old and a small business owner will remember June differently in September. She kept the hours. That note, with the timestamps of her shifts on it, is Exhibit 4. 11 weeks before the party, they had been retained by Vaughn Halberd Industries. Vaughn Halberd made, among other things, the guidance section for a missile that the United States has a great many of. Terrence Vaughn's grandfather had started the company in a machine shop. Terrence had turned it into a $9 billion concern, and the classified side of that business was not a slice of the company. It was the company. Take away the facility clearance, and what remains is a large parking lot and a lot of debt. The retention had not been Terrence's idea. It had been the government's. Vaughn Halberd had failed 2 consecutive government security reviews, been given a corrective action plan, and been told, in the mild bureaucratic phrasing that means, "Your existence is in question." That an independent assessment of its insider threat program would be well received. Frank had walked into that building in March with a laptop and a list. And in 9 weeks of reading, one name kept surfacing in the way that a body surfaces in a lake. Loman Vaughn was 24 and held the title Vice President for Strategic Initiatives, which meant nothing, and an interim security clearance, which meant a great deal. He had an office he used maybe 6 days a month. He also had, in the company's own records, if you knew how to read them, 3 badge anomalies, where his credential entered a closed area at hours he had no business being in the building. A foreign travel report he had never filed for a trip his own social media dated to February. 2 expense entries at a resort in a country whose intelligence service takes an active interest in American missile guidance. and a security incident report from a junior employee, filed and then withdrawn 11 days later at the employee's request. The 9 weeks Frank spent inside Vaughn Halberd deserve their own telling, because that building is where this was decided, long before the party. An insider threat audit is not exciting. You sit in a windowless room they give you because nobody wants it, and you read. You read visitor logs and badge histories, and the training completion records. You read the incident reports and, more importantly, you read the gaps. The reports that start and stop, the ones with a case number and no disposition. You interview 40 people who all begin by telling you the program is going great. By week 3, Frank knew the shape of the place the way you know a house you have been in for a while at night. The security staff were good and demoralized. The facility security officer was a competent woman 2 years from retirement who had escalated the same 4 issues for 3 years and had a folder of her own emails, which she showed him on day 9 with the specific dead calm of somebody who has been waiting a long time for a person to show her a badge and ask. The culture, though. The culture was the finding. There is a question Frank asks in every interview, and it is not about security at all. He asks, what happens here to somebody who writes something down that turns out to be inconvenient? You get one of 3 answers. Most companies say nothing. Why? A struggling one says, it depends. At Vaughn Halberd, 11 separate people, unprompted, told him a version of the same story about a man named Ozark Pell. Pell was 26 and worked in classified document control. In February, he had written an incident report because a visitor had been walked into a closed area without a processed visit request. He named the escort because that is the entire point of the form, and the escort was Loman Vaughn. 11 days later, Pell withdrew the report. The withdrawal memo says, employee determined the concern was unfounded. Frank interviewed him in week 5, in a conference room with a glass wall, and Ozark Pell answered every question in 4 words or fewer, and looked at the glass wall approximately once every 90 seconds. At the end, Frank closed his laptop and said, you know I have to write that you withdrew it. Yes, sir. I'm not going to write why, because you haven't told me why, and I don't write things I can't source. He put a card on the table. But if you ever decide you want to tell somebody why, do it in writing, date it, and send a copy to your personal email before you send it to anybody else. Pell did not touch the card, but he did not leave it on the table either, and Frank noticed which pocket it went into. That is the whole reason there was a paper trail in May instead of a rumor in July. The May meeting with Lennox Bramble was 18 minutes long. Frank had learned to bring bad findings in early and in person, not as courtesy but as tactics, a general counsel who has been told cannot later be surprised. He laid out 4 things: the badge anomalies, the unfiled foreign travel, the resort, the withdrawn report, and Bramble asked good questions for 11 minutes, which was, Frank thought afterwards, the last 11 honest minutes that man had. Then Bramble asked how long the draft had to sit before it became a report, and Frank told him 30 days from the closeout, and something went out of the room. Frank, Bramble said, do you understand what this does to us? Yes. Bramble squared the pages, which people do when they are deciding. Let me take it to the chairman. That's the correct next step, Frank said. And that was true. It was also, as it turned out, the moment Vaughn Halberd Industries chose how it was going to die. Because Bramble did take it to the chairman, on the 6th of June, and Terrence Vaughn read 4 pages about his son, and said the sentence that appears verbatim in the government's final report: handle it internally. That was 7 weeks before Loman Vaughn broke Thomasina Brannan's jaw at a party in his father's house. You cannot understand what Terrence Vaughn did on that phone call unless you understand that it was, to him, generous. His grandfather had started Vaughn Halberd in a 2-bay machine shop making gun camera mounts and had died with 300 employees and a heart condition. His father had grown it and then nearly lost it in the 80s, and Terrence, who was 29 at the time, had done the thing the family still told at Christmas. He had flown to Washington with no appointment, sat in a hallway for 2 days, and come home with a subcontract that saved them. That story is the family's founding scripture, and its moral is simple and, in fairness, half true. The world is a set of rooms, and the man who is willing to sit in the hallway gets into the room. The corollary he drew from it, over the next 30 years, is the part that rotted. If you can get into any room, then every outcome is a room you have not yet gotten into, which means every bad thing that happens to you is, at bottom, a failure of access, which means nothing is ever simply wrong. And it is only unnegotiated. He had negotiated a lot. In 1998, he negotiated an environmental finding about a solvent plume under the old plant into a monitoring agreement that has still, today, never required him to dig anything up. In 2006, he negotiated a labor complaint into a training program. In 2014, he negotiated a state senator's opposition into a building with the senator's mother's name on it. None of these were crimes. That is the point I want to make about him, because a cartoon villain is useless to you. For 30 years, Terrence Vaughn mostly did legal things that worked, and the muscle he built doing them is the muscle he used at 11 o'clock at night when his son broke a girl's jaw. And there was Loman. The boy had been ordinary at 9 and unbearable by 17, which is a specific tragedy that money does very efficiently. He had been removed from 2 schools, both times with a donation and a letter. He had been arrested once at 20 for a fight outside a bar in another state, and the charge had gone away in a manner nobody in the family had ever asked about. He had been given a title at 22 because his father genuinely believed that responsibility would settle him, which is not a stupid theory. It is simply not a theory you test with a security clearance. What the boy actually learned, in 24 years, was one lesson taught to him 1,000 times, in 1,000 small ways, that consequences are a thing that happens to other people, and that the interval between his worst moment and its cleanup would always be measured in hours. On the 21st of June, that lesson was true for about 6.5 hours, which is the longest it had ever been. Here is what you should know about Tommy, because she is not a plot device. She was 19 and had just finished her freshman year at a state school 2 hours away, studying, of all things, geology, because at 15, she had taken a rock hammer to a road cut on a family trip and never got over it. She was funny, in a dry, sideways way that took people a minute. She had her mother's hands. Corabelle Brannon had died 4 years earlier, a stroke, at 41, in a kitchen, with no warning and no arguing with it. And in the 4 years since, Frank and his daughter had built the specific, careful, slightly awkward household that 2 people build when the third one is gone. They had systems. They texted each other a single dot when they got somewhere safely. She teased him about the way he backed into every parking space. That summer she was working for Vesta Mercier's catering company, which is a very ordinary 19-year-old job. Black pants, white shirt, hair up, carry the tray, don't make eye contact, be invisible. On the 21st of June, Vesta Mercier's company was working a party at the Vaughn house. The house sits on 1,100 acres in the western part of Kingsolver County, at the end of a private road with a gatehouse, 200 guests, a tented lawn, a band flown in. Tommy was working the interior, passing trays through the long hall on the ground floor, refilling from a staging kitchen in the service wing. Around 11, she went down the back corridor with an empty tray, and Loman Vaughn was in it, with 2 friends and a bottle. The parts that are not in dispute, because 11 people eventually said them under oath, are these. He had been drinking for 6 hours. He had been asked twice by the house staff to stay out of the service wing. He took hold of her arm as she went past. She said, "Please don't," and pulled her arm free, and it was the pulling free that did it, the small public failure of it, in front of his friends. He said something, she said something back, and what she said back was not clever or brave. It was, in her words later, "I said I was working," and he hit her. Once, with a closed right hand, on the left side of the jaw, and she went into the corner of a marble console table on the way down, and that is where the second and third fractures came from. There was blood on the floor of a service corridor in a house where 200 people were eating salmon 80 feet away. There is a version of that night from the inside, and Tommy has told it enough times now that she can do it without her voice moving. The service wing of that house is a corridor with a stone floor, a staging kitchen at one end, and a back stair. Catering staff are not guests and they are not furniture. They are somewhere in between, which is a strange place to spend an evening. You learn very fast which rooms you are invisible in. She had been on since 4. Her feet hurt in the specific way that only happens on stone. Around 10:30, a guest had asked her whether the salmon was from a farm or from the world, and she had thought about that line for 20 minutes and texted it to her roommate, which is how the timeline of the evening is fixed to the minute. The message went out at 10:41. At 11, she came down the corridor with an empty tray, and the three of them were in it, and the one in the middle was the son of the man whose name was on the gate. She had seen him twice that night. He was drunk in a way she recognized, not sloppy, tightened. He took her arm above the elbow, not hard, the way you take an arm when you intend the gesture to be noticed by your friends rather than by the person attached to it. "Please don't," she said, and pulled free. She has said over and over that the sentence she said next was not brave. "I said I was working." She has been complimented for it in 3 separate courtrooms, and she hates it every time, because she knows what it actually was, which is a 19-year-old trying to be polite. To a man who had just grabbed her, because polite is what you are taught to be, and it did not save her, and it was never going to. She does not remember the second and third fractures. She remembers the sound the tray made, and she remembers being on the floor with her hand on the stone and thinking, with total practicality, that she needed to find her phone. Then a man in a suit she had never seen was crouching next to her and saying her name in a soft voice, and he already knew her name, and she remembers understanding, 19 years old, on a floor, with her jaw in 3 pieces, that he already knew her name because he had already gotten a list. She was in the private ambulance 11 minutes later. She has one clear memory from it, which is one of the 2 paramedics looking at the other one over her body and saying, "No, we're going to regional," and the other one saying, "They said Wexford," and the first one saying, "I don't care." Frank has tried 3 times to find out which paramedic that was. Nobody at the service will say. He has a standing arrangement with a florist near their base to send an arrangement to the crew room every June 21st, addressed to nobody, and he has never included a card. And then the machine started, and the machine was very, very good. Quion Sarnoff had been a police officer in the state's 2nd largest city for 19 years before Terrence Vaughn hired him to run the family's private security. And everything he knew about how a case is built he now used, in reverse, at speed. He got to the corridor in 90 seconds. He got Lohman out of the house and into a car within 4 minutes. He put 2 of his men on the corridor with a mop and a roll of contractor bags. He took the phones of the 3 staff who had seen it and told them, calmly and pleasantly, that the family would be reviewing footage and that anybody who had recorded anything on private property during a private event had a problem, and would they like to just unlock it and let him confirm nothing had been recorded. All 3 unlocked their phones. He deleted what he found. He called a private ambulance service the family had used for 11 years, so there would be no 911 recording and no county EMS run sheet. And he called Vesta Mercier at home at 11:40 at night and told her there had been an incident, that a young lady on her crew had had too much to drink and fallen, and that the family was going to take care of everything. And by the way, the Vaughn Foundation's event calendar for the next 18 months was something he'd like to talk to her about in the morning. Vesta Mercier had 4 employees and a van loan. She said okay. The one thing Sarnoff did not control was the destination, because the private ambulance crew took one look at a 19-year-old with a jaw sitting visibly wrong and drove her to the regional hospital instead of the clinic they had been told, which is the entire reason there is a story to tell. Frank got the call at 12:20 in the morning, not from the family and not from the hospital, but from Tommy's roommate, who had been texted a photograph by another girl on the crew before Sarnoff took the phones, and who had spent 30 minutes deciding whether it was her business. He drove 81 miles. He does not remember the drive. What he remembers is the resident and the CT images on the wall monitor, and the specific sound his daughter made when she tried to say dad with her mandible in 3 pieces. He remembers standing in that corridor and understanding, with total clarity, that he was going to have to be a different kind of man in about 4 hours than the one who was currently in danger of tearing a hospital apart with his hands. At 2:15, he called the Kingsolver County Sheriff's Office and asked for a deputy to come and take a report, and a deputy came, and the deputy was polite and young and wrote things down. At 6:40 in the morning, a detective named Rodney Devereaux called him back and said the words that Frank had known were coming since the moment he learned whose house it was. "Sir, we've spoken to the residents. Their position is she'd been drinking and she fell. We don't have any witnesses saying otherwise. We don't have any video. And the private ambulance report says the same thing. Now if that changes." "Detective," Frank said, "do me a favor and write down the time of this call." "Sir, just write it down." He was not being dramatic. He was building the only thing he had ever really been good at building, which is a record. Here is the thing about a man like Frank Brannan, that men like Terrence Vaughn consistently fail to understand. Terrence Vaughn's entire model of the world was that everything is a negotiation with a person, and every person has a hinge. Find the hinge, apply money, the door opens. It had never failed him. He had bought a zoning variance, a congressional aide, a college dean, 2 ex-wives and, once, an entire county's worth of goodwill by donating a hospital wing. When his son had put a girl named Delphi Casaubon in an emergency room 2 years earlier, he had bought that too, for $400,000 and a non-disclosure agreement, and Delphi Casaubon had been 19 and had signed it in an office in a building she had never been in before, with a lawyer she met that morning. So when a man's daughter got hurt in his house, Terrence Vaughn did what had always worked, and he did it fast, and he did it personally. Because he believed the personal touch was what closed it. What he did not know, because his own general counsel had not told him, because his own security chief did not read audit engagement letters, because nobody in that family had ever once had to know the name of a person who was merely doing a job in their building, was that the man on the other end of that phone was, at that exact moment, 7 days from delivering an independent assessment of Vaughn Halberd's insider threat program to Vaughn Halberd's board and, through the corrective action plan, to the government. And that under the rules Frank had spent his whole civilian career inside, a violent assault by a cleared individual is reportable adverse information, and that the reporting channel does not run through a sheriff's office, or a prosecutor, or a county at all. It runs through a portal. It goes to the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, and it is time-stamped, and once it is in, there is no version of the universe in which it comes back out. "You have 10 minutes to hand him over," Frank had said, and the reason he had said 10 minutes, and not, "I'm going to ruin you," is that he was not making a threat. He was giving a man one chance to make the report unnecessary, because if Loman Vaughn surrendered himself to the sheriff and was charged, the report would say, "The individual self-reported and was arrested." Which is survivable. It happens. Companies live through it. If instead the family suppressed it, deleted video, coerced witnesses, falsified a medical intake, and bought a caterer, then the report would not be about a drunk kid with a temper. It would be about a cleared defense contractor's leadership actively concealing a violent felony committed by a cleared insider, using company-adjacent security personnel to intimidate witnesses. Those are two completely different documents. One is a bad month. The other is the end of a $9 billion company. Terrence Vaughn laughed and hung up, and Frank Brannan sat in his truck in a hospital parking lot for 4 minutes with his hands on the wheel, and then he opened his laptop. He did not write anything new. That is the part people find hard to believe. Everything he sent had already been written, over 9 weeks, in a draft report saved on an encrypted drive. The badge anomalies, the unreported foreign travel, the resort in the wrong country, the withdrawn incident report from the junior employee. What Frank did in that parking lot was add a 2-page addendum, dated and timed, describing the events of the previous night as he then knew them, and identifying the specific personnel involved in the response. Then he did 4 things in the following order, and every one of them took less than 2 minutes. He transmitted the addendum and the underlying draft to Vaughn Halberd's general counsel, Lennox Bramble, with a read receipt, because under the rules, the company is the reporter, and a company that has been formally notified by its own auditor and does not report within the window has committed a second, worse violation. He filed his own report in the portal as an individual with an active clearance, which he was, because a cleared person who becomes aware of adverse information about another cleared person is himself required to report it. His obligation was not derivative of the company's. He emailed the industrial security representative assigned to Vaughn Halberd's facility, a woman named Trellis, whom he had met 3 times and who had been an oral surgeon's assistant in a previous life and asked better questions than anybody in that building, with 1 paragraph and the case number the portal had just generated. And he called Jean Kepler and said, "Get the drive out of my house tonight, put it in your safe deposit box, and don't tell me which bank." Then he went back inside and sat with his daughter while she slept. The 9 minutes are not really 9 minutes. Frank has been asked about that number in 3 separate proceedings, and he always corrects it. The phone rang 9 minutes after Terrence Vaughn hung up, but nothing about what happened in that window was fast. It was just already loaded. Here is what happened in it. The portal generated a case number and an automated notification to the assigned industrial security representative. Trellis was awake because it was 6:50 in the morning by then, and she had a toddler. She read the paragraph. She recognized the company name instantly because Vaughn Halberd was on a short internal list of facilities under a corrective action plan, which is a list nobody wants to be on and which is read every morning by more people than you would think. She made 1 phone call to her own supervisor and used a phrase that has a very specific meaning in that world. Meanwhile, the read receipt on the email to Lennox Bramble came back at 6:47. Bramble was in his kitchen. He read a 2-page addendum describing witness phone seizures and deleted footage at his chairman's home, attached to a draft finding he had personally seen in May and personally not acted on. Lennox Bramble had 2 children in college and a pension and had been a lawyer for 31 years, and he understood, in the 4 seconds it took to reach the bottom of page 1, that the only remaining question in his life was which side of the line he was going to be on when this became a matter of record. He did not call Terrence Vaughn. He called Kestrel Ridgely, the family's outside counsel, and read her the first paragraph, and Kestrel Ridgely, who had been retained 90 minutes earlier to make a girl's broken jaw go away, heard the words Insider Threat Program, Adverse Information, Already Filed, and Case Number, and understood that she had walked into an entirely different building than the one she thought she was in. That is who was on the phone at 6:56 in the morning, breathing wrong. "Mr. Brannon, my name is Kestrel Ridgely. I represent the Vaughn family, and I need to know exactly what you have just done." "I filed a report," Frank said. "With whom?" "With the government." "About what?" "Ms. Ridgely," he said, "you're a lawyer. You know I'm not going to describe the contents of a report to you, but I'll tell you what I told your client. He had 10 minutes to hand his son over to the sheriff. That would have made the last 12 hours a stupid thing a drunk 24-year-old did. He laughed at me instead, so now it's the other thing." He could hear her turning pages. He could hear, faintly, a man's voice in the background, not Terrence Bramble's. "Whatever you started," Kestrel Ridgely said, "can it be stopped?" "No, Mr. Brannon. I want you to hear this correctly, because I think you're about to spend a month of your life telling people what I said." Frank had not raised his voice once, and did not now. "It's not a lever. It's not a demand. There is no number, and there's nothing for you to buy, because it is already filed, and it is not mine anymore. It belongs to a case number." He watched a nurse walk a woman in a bathrobe slowly down the sidewalk. "Your client thought this was a negotiation between 2 fathers. It was never that. It was a compliance deadline, and he had 10 minutes, and he used them to laugh." She was quiet. "Mr. Vaughn wants to accept everything," she said. "Everything you asked for. He'll surrender his son this morning. He'll, whatever the number is, whatever the arrangement is, just stop what you started." "There's nothing to stop," Frank said, "but you should still surrender him." "It'll matter later." They surrendered Loman Vaughn at 9:15 that morning, walked into the sheriff's office by 2 attorneys, and photographed by nobody, and he was charged with aggravated assault, and the family's public position within 6 hours was that they were cooperating fully. By then it did not matter, because the thing about a regulatory machine is that it does not read the newspaper. The first stop work order arrived at Vaughn Halberd's Building 4 at 2:40 that afternoon. It was not dramatic. It was a 2-paragraph email from a contracting officer, and it suspended work on 1 program pending a security review, and 11 engineers were told to log off, and they logged off, and they sat there looking at each other. The second and third came the next morning. By Friday there were 9, and the classified spaces on the campus were closed and sealed, which meant 140 people came to work, badged in, and had nothing they were legally permitted to do. On the following Tuesday, an assessment team arrived, and they were there for 11 weeks. And what they found was not about a party at all. They found the badge anomalies. They found the unreported travel. They found that a 24-year-old with an interim clearance had taken 2 closed-area tours for people whose visit requests had never been processed. They found the withdrawn incident report, and, because they were the government and not an auditor, they went and found the junior employee who had withdrawn it, a 26-year-old named Ozark Pell, and sat with him for 2 hours, and Ozark Pell told them what happens in that company when you write something down about the chairman's son. They found the security chief's expense reports, which showed that Quion Sarnoff's private security company had been paid, for 4 years, out of a Vaughn Halberd corporate account on invoices coded as Site Vulnerability Assessment, which meant that when Sarnoff seized 3 witnesses' phones and deleted evidence of a felony at 11 o'clock at night, he did it as a de facto agent of a cleared defense contractor. That single accounting decision, made years earlier by a bookkeeper trying to be efficient, is what turned a family's ugly private conduct into a corporate compliance catastrophe. The campus going quiet is the image I cannot get out of my head, so I am going to give it to you. Vaughn Halberd's main site is 4 buildings and a test cell on 200 acres, and the classified work lived in Building 4, which has no windows on 3 sides and a badge line at 7 in the morning that used to run out the door. On the Friday after the 9th stop work order, 140 people badged in at 7 and had nothing they were permitted to do. The closed areas were sealed, literally, with numbered tape across the doors, and the safes were locked, and the terminals were dark, and 140 engineers and technicians and document control clerks sat in a cafeteria all day, because sending them home would have been an admission, and nobody upstairs could decide anything. There is a photograph, taken by somebody's phone, and later entered as an exhibit for an unrelated reason, of that cafeteria at 2 in the afternoon. 60 or 70 people at tables. Nobody talking much. A man in his 50s doing a crossword. It is the least dramatic photograph you have ever seen, and it is a picture of a $9 billion company dying. Frank has seen that photograph. He was shown it in a deposition by Kestrel Ridgely, who slid it across the table and asked him whether he had considered these people when he filed. He said yes. He said he had considered them at 6:44 in the morning in a hospital parking lot, and that he had also considered the woman who had been the facility security officer for 6 years and had escalated the same 4 issues 11 times, and Ozark Pell, who had unwritten his own honest report because of what happens in that building, to people who write things down, and Delphi Casaubon, who had signed a paragraph at 19. He said that if a company's continued existence depends on a violent felony staying unreported, that company has already made the decision, and that the man who writes it down is not the one who made it. Then he said the line that ended the deposition an hour early, and it is the only time in 11 months that Frank Brannon said something with heat in it. Ms. Ridgely, I filed at 6:44. Your client had until 6:41. If 140 people want to be angry about 3 minutes, they should be angry at the man who spent them laughing. There is one more thing about that Friday, and it is small. At about 4 in the afternoon, the woman who had been the facility security officer for 6 years, the one with the folder of her own emails, walked out to the cafeteria and stood at the front of it and told 140 people, honestly, what a facility clearance review is, how long it takes, what it looks for, and what would and would not happen to their individual clearances. It took her 19 minutes. Nobody had asked her to do it. She was allowed to retire on schedule the following spring. When the assessment team's final report came out, hers was the only name in it that appeared with the phrase, the program's sole effective control. She kept every one of those emails for 3 years, and nobody ever read them until it cost 1,100 people their jobs. And I would like you to think about how many buildings in this country currently contain a woman with a folder like that. And in week 6, they found Delphi Casaubon. They were not looking for her. They were interviewing former employees, and a woman who had left the company 18 months earlier mentioned, in passing, that there had been the thing with the girl at the lake house, and the assessment team wrote the sentence down, and somebody pulled a thread, and the thread led to a $400,000 settlement paid from a family trust to a 19-year-old with a fractured orbital bone. Delphi Casaubon was 21 now and living in Ohio, and she had signed a paragraph promising never to discuss it, and she had believed for 2 years that the paragraph was a wall. It is not a wall. A non-disclosure agreement cannot bar you from talking to a federal investigator, and it cannot bar you from responding to a subpoena. And the man who told her that, on a Tuesday afternoon in a parking lot outside a community college, was Frank Brannan, who had driven 6 hours to say it to her face because he did not think it should be said on a phone. "I signed it," she said. "I took the money." "You were 19 and your face was broken," Frank said. "That's not a character flaw, that's a Tuesday. Do you want to know what I actually came to tell you?" She waited. "You are not the reason it happened again. He is. And you're about to be the reason it stops." She testified twice. The second time, she read her own paragraph out loud, the one she had signed at 19, and then said, "I don't think I was allowed to agree to that," and the room was very quiet. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to tell you Frank Brannan won by pressing a button, and he did not. The report started the machine. The next 11 months were a knife fight. The 11 months in between were not a montage. The assessment team's interviews ran from July to October and turned up things nobody had gone looking for. They found that the badge system had a supervisor override function which had been used 41 times in 2 years, 34 of them by the same 2 accounts. They found a closed area visitor log with 11 entries in the same handwriting on 11 different dates. They found that the company's insider threat working group had not met in 14 months and that its meeting minutes for that period existed anyway. Frank was deposed 4 times. The third one lasted 9 hours and was the one they had built to break him, and their theory was reasonable, that a father whose daughter had been hurt could not possibly be a neutral auditor, and that everything after June 21st was revenge dressed as compliance. Kestrel Ridgely was good. She walked him line by line through the addendum, looking for one adjective, one place where he had characterized instead of recorded. She found, in 2 pages, exactly one. He had written that Sarnoff's men had swept the corridor. "Swept," she said. "That's a colorful word, isn't it, Mr. Brannan? Did you see them sweep?" "No, ma'am. I wasn't there. That word should not be in the document. It should say that 2 individuals were reported by a named witness to have cleaned the corridor with a mop and contractor bags, and I'd like the record to show I got that wrong." She looked at him for a second longer than she meant to. There is nothing to do with a witness who corrects himself against his own interest. He has just made every other sentence in the document heavier. Quion Sarnoff did not break in a deposition, because men like Sarnoff do not. He broke over 8 weeks in a room with 2 federal agents and an accountant, and the thing that did it was not conscience. It was the invoices. He had spent 4 years billing his personal security company's work to a corporate account because it was convenient, and the day it was explained to him what that fact converted his private loyalty into, a cleared defense contractor's agent tampering with evidence, he asked for a lawyer, and 11 days later he asked for a deal. His statement is 31 pages. There is a sentence on page 9 that the prosecutor read out loud twice. "I did the phones first, because phones are what makes a case." And there was the board. Terrence Vaughn was removed as chairman in February, 4 weeks before the revocation, by a vote of the board he had personally assembled. He did not fight it, which surprised people. The minutes record that he spoke for 2 minutes and said, among other things, that he had done what any father would do. 2 directors resigned that day. One of them, a retired vice admiral who had joined the board 8 years earlier because he liked the missile, gave one interview afterwards and said one sentence that got quoted everywhere. The company did not lose its clearance because a young man threw a punch. It lost it because 11 adults decided the punch was a public relations problem. They came at him the way that money comes at people. They tried to disqualify him first. A letter from Kestrel Ridgely's firm to the government arguing that his assessment was tainted by personal interest, since his daughter was a complaining witness. It was a decent argument, and it failed for a reason Frank had built in 7 weeks before the party ever happened. The draft findings were dated, version controlled, and had been formally transmitted to Lennox Bramble in May. He had not invented anything after his daughter got hurt. He had merely stopped protecting Vaughn Halberd from itself. They came at his business. 2 of his 4 clients dropped him within a month, and both apologized, and one of them cried on the phone. They came at his house, not with anything actionable, just the modern version. A truck parked at the end of his road for 3 nights. A man photographing his mailbox. a series of complaints filed against his consultancy's registration. And they came at Tommy, which was the mistake. A reputation management firm hired at 3 removes put together a package on a 19-year-old girl, 2 photos from a party her freshman year, a traffic ticket, a tweet from when she was 15. They fed it to a local blog, and the blog ran it, and for about a week the comment sections of Kingsolver County were full of people who had never met her explaining what kind of girl she was. Tommy could not open her mouth more than 9 millimeters at the time. She read all of it, because of course she did. And then, on a Sunday afternoon, with her jaw still wired, she wrote 406 words in a note on her phone and posted them, and I am not going to reproduce them here because they are hers, but the shape of it was this. She named every single thing in the package, admitted the 2 that were true, corrected the 2 that were not, and then wrote one line that ended it. You are welcome to decide I'm a bad person. It has nothing to do with whether he broke my jaw, and I noticed that nobody has said he didn't. The blog took the piece down in 11 hours. The reputation firm's invoice, later, became an exhibit. By March, Vaughn Halberd Industries had lost its facility clearance. Not suspended, revoked. It is a rare thing. The government does not like doing it, because it hurts programs and it hurts workers, and the record shows they did not do it for the assault. They did it for the concealment. For a chairman who ran a personal security operation out of a corporate account, for a general counsel who sat on a finding for 7 weeks, for a documented pattern of retaliating against employees who wrote things down. 9 programs went to competitors. 1,100 people lost their jobs, and I want to say plainly that that is a real cost, and that Frank Brannon thinks about it, and that the men responsible for it were not the man who filed the form. Terrence Vaughn was not charged with a crime for a year and a half. And then he was. Conspiracy to obstruct justice, tampering with a witness, and, this is the one his lawyers never saw coming, making false statements to the government, because in October, he had personally signed a certification, as chairman, attesting that the company had reported all adverse information known to it. He had signed it 11 weeks after his son broke a girl's jaw in his house. Quion Sarnoff pled to evidence tampering and witness intimidation, and served 26 months, and the state's certification board pulled the license his security company operated under. Lennox Bramble, who had made one phone call to the right person on the worst morning of his life, cooperated fully and was not charged and was disbarred anyway, in a proceeding that took 9 minutes, which is a number he has surely noticed. Loman Vaughn pled guilty to aggravated assault. Because of Delphi Casaubon, and because of Ozark Pell, and because of a 19-year-old caterer's assistant named Kimberly, who had been one of the 3 staff whose phone was seized, and who, it turned out, had backed the video up automatically to a cloud account she had forgotten she had. Because of all of them, he pled to the real thing, and not to a misdemeanor, and he served 4 years. Vesta Mercier lost the Vaughn contract, obviously, and nearly lost her business, and eventually testified about the 1140 phone call, and today caters, among other things, a Kingsolver County scholarship dinner every May. And Tommy Brannon had 3 surgeries, ate through a straw until the middle of October, went back to school in the spring, changed nothing about her major, and graduated in geology with a thesis on road-cut stratigraphy that her father does not understand a word of and has read 4 times. She is 23 now. She works for a state geological survey. She has a small, permanent asymmetry along her jawline that she does not hide, and that, she says, makes her look like she knows something. There is one more scene I have to give you, because it is the one Frank tells. 8 months into it, before the revocation, there was a hallway outside a conference room in a federal building, and Terrence Vaughn was in it, alone for once, and he looked at Frank Brannon, and he asked the question that had clearly been eating him alive. What was the number, he said. That night. If I'd asked you seriously, what was it? And Frank told him the truth, which is that there wasn't one, and Terrence Vaughn did not believe him. He was physically unable to believe him. He stood in that hallway and said, "Everybody has a number," in the voice of a man reciting the only scripture he has. You had 10 minutes, Frank said, and the price was your son in the back of a car. That was the whole offer. It was cheaper than anything you've ever paid for anything. I want to give you the 2 smallest scenes in this whole story, because they are the ones Frank Brannon actually carries. The first is from the 2nd week of July, 3 weeks after the party. Tommy's jaw was still wired, and she had lost 11 pounds, and she had a whiteboard she wrote on, because talking hurt, and because her father had a habit of not hearing mumbling. He came into the kitchen at 6 in the morning, and there was a note on the board in her handwriting, and it said, "Are we going to be poor?" He had lost 2 clients by then. She had been in the room when the second call came. He wrote under it, because it seemed like the right register. Maybe, not hungry poor, sell the truck poor. And she took the marker back and wrote, "Good, keep going." He photographed that board. It is the only photograph of the whole 11 months that he keeps on his phone. The second scene is from November, and it is the one that will tell you what this actually cost. There was a hearing in a state courthouse, a routine one, on a motion nobody remembers now. Tommy went because she had decided early that she was going to be in every room she was allowed to be in. Not out of defiance, she says, but out of arithmetic. A person who is present at all of it cannot later be described to a jury by somebody who was not. In the corridor afterwards, a woman came up to her. 50s, good coat, kind face. She said she was a friend of the Vaughn family and that she just wanted to say she was praying for everyone, and that it was such a shame, all of it, for both families. And then she said the sentence that people say, the one that is meant to sound like sympathy and is actually the last, cheapest weapon. "He's only 24, sweetheart. Do you really want to take his whole life?" Tommy could open her mouth 31 millimeters by then. She said, "No, ma'am. I want mine back. He can keep his." And she walked away, and got in the truck, and cried for about a minute and a half, and then said, through the wires, "Can we get milkshakes?" And they did. There is one part of the aftermath I have not told you, and it matters more than the money. 6 weeks after the revocation, a man named Vaughn Kepler, no relation to Jean, the world is small and lousy with Keplers, filed a report at a different defense contractor 2 states away about a manager's unreported foreign contacts. He is on record about why. He had read one paragraph in a trade publication about the Vaughn Halberd matter, and the paragraph said that the individual who filed the original report had been personally targeted, had lost half his clients, and had been upheld on every point. "I figured if it went that badly for him, and he still won," Devin Kepler said, "then it works. That is what a case like this actually produces. Not justice exactly. Justice is too clean a word for 1,100 people losing jobs because their chairman could not tell the difference between a son and an asset. What it produces is precedent in the nervous system. Some number of ordinary employees in ordinary buildings who now believe that the boring form is real. Frank keeps a list of the ones he knows about. There are 9 names on it. He has never met any of them. Here is why I wanted to tell you this one. And it is not because a billionaire lost his company. Rich men lose companies every year and it changes nothing. It is because of the shape of what actually happened. A man with a broken daughter did not go and get a gun, and he did not call in favors, and he did not have a secret army of old teammates. He filled out a form he was required by law to fill out, on time, having already done the boring, unglamorous, unthrilling work of writing things down for 9 weeks before he had any personal reason to care. That is the whole trick, and it is available to almost nobody in the moment, and almost everybody in advance. Because here is what I keep turning over. If Frank Brannon had not already been inside that building, if he had not already spent 9 weeks documenting badge anomalies that had nothing to do with him, then that phone call in the hospital parking lot would have gone exactly the way Terrence Vaughn expected. There would have been a number. There would have been an NDA. Tommy would have an apartment in another state and a paragraph, like Delphi Casaubon had a paragraph. And Loman Vaughn would be 26 and looking for the third one. The leverage did not come from the injury. The leverage came from work Frank did when nothing was at stake. So the thing I would actually take from this, the record you keep before you need it, is the only record that will ever save you. Date it. Send it to someone outside your own house. Write the boring version, the one with badge numbers and times in it, not the one with feelings. And if you are ever in a position where a rule requires you to report something, and it would be so much easier not to, that rule is not paperwork. That rule is the one wall in the world that money genuinely cannot climb, and it only works if the people standing next to it are the kind who fill out the form. And one last thing, For anybody who has ever signed a paragraph at 19 and believed it was a wall, it isn't. Go ask somebody. Ask this week.